Jimmy Carter, one of the youngest presidents to leave the office, and involuntarily at that, having been defeated, of course, in the election by the man who we saw inaugurated as his successor today. Jimmy Carter is not a wealthy man. He returns to Plains, Georgia, with, we're told, savings of $300,000 or $400,000, $70,000 pension, initial office expenses of $150,000 a year. We're told he's going to write, teach, lecture, fish and hunt, but he'll have a first and official duty appointed by this new president to represent him at Wiesbaden on the return of the hostages, a word of which we still do not have officially that they have left. Associated Press now has another story that the Iranian news agency Pars has reported the takeoff of the aircraft with the hostages, and that's the nearest thing to an official report we've had yet. The West German embassy in Tehran quoted the Tehran radio as saying that the hostages had flown out of Tehran as well. That's also quoting the Iranian news agency Pars. So we can, I guess, come to that conclusion that the Iranians, in the last defiance of civilized behavior, waited until the inauguration of President Reagan before letting the hostages go, keeping them waiting an unnecessary 24 hours beyond the unnecessary 444 days. We'll have more CBS News coverage of the inauguration in a moment.
Here again is Walter Cronkite.
The official Iranian news agency says that the hostages have taken off from Tehran airport finally. We are 35 minutes into the administration of Ronald Reagan, our 40th president of the United States, an administration that, as U.S. News and World Report says, his supporters hope will find him as the new FDR of the right, redesigning and realigning the nation's economy and politics, but also with the words of Mr. Carter's farewell ringing in his ears, warning against special interests and the entrenched bureaucracy. We'll all see how it goes in the next 4 years. Let's go back now to Dan Rather in New York for an update on the hostage situation. Dan?
Walter, according to our CBS News sources at Tehran Airport, one of the two Algerian jetliners is taxiing, or was just a few moments ago. And the drama on the runway of the Tehran Airport continues as the long agony for the brave 52 has continued throughout this morning. Now, as best we can make it out, here is where the situation with the American hostages stands at this moment. They remain in Tehran, or at least they were up until just a few moments ago, at the airport, apparently moments away from their flight to freedom, a few moments after spending 444 days in captivity. And can you imagine what it must have been like inside that airliner for the hostages this morning? The Algerian plane that is to take them to freedom is said to be on the runway at the airport. It has been there for some time. The 52 hostages are reported aboard. The plane is reported to have been taxiing on the runway, preparing for takeoff, one of the two planes. The other airplane on the runway, but not taxiing. That's according to the Reuters news agency and our own CBS contact at the airport. Walter?
Thank you, Dan. We're waiting now.
Coming up next on News Center 8, freedom for the hostages and a new president for the country.
And we have an Earth Station 8 report tonight from Judd and Susan at the inaugural, and words of joy from local hostage families.
John in for Jim says it is official, Bum has a new home. And Dick has put up a slop watch for Northeast Ohio.
Stay with us and find out. News Center 8 is next.
Cleveland's Emmy Award-winning News Center 8 is next with those stories and reaction from local relatives of released hostages. And Stan Childress, his special report on El Salvador.
Good evening. Judd is on special assignment in Washington, D.C. I'm Dave Buckle.
I'm Tim Taylor. Thanks for joining us. Here's what's happening. And on this day, one of the most memorable in the history of the Republic, bells rang out, sirens blared, horns honked, and pent-up emotions poured out. The 52 American hostages were finally freed after 444 days in captivity. Ironically, their freedom flight out of Tehran, with cries of "Down with America" surrounding them, came at almost the same time that "America the Beautiful" was being sung at the conclusion of President Reagan's inaugural. Then, within the hour, the newly freed Americans landed in Athens, Greece. These are the first pictures pressure since their release. The planes were refueled for the flight to Wiesbaden, West Germany, for what is called a period of decompression, to accustom themselves to freedom. They'll talk with their families by phone, but not actually see one another until their return to the States in a few days. But the former hostages will be seeing the former president, Jimmy Carter, who is traveling to West Germany tonight to greet the men and women for whom he worked so long to free. And Dave, the joy of this long-awaited day was enhanced by the inauguration of a president.
Well, Tim, our 40th president, as Ronald Reagan, took the oath of office just before noon today. Where we're told that within minutes, the hostages were to fly out of Tehran. The day made all the brighter by the warmest inaugural weather in Washington in years. The president upbeat all the way, sounding a note of renewed hope for the country. Today's inaugural celebration lasting well into the early morning hours in the Capitol, which is alive now with inaugural festivity. News Center 8's Judd Hambrick and Susan Howard in Washington will have a special report for us via satellite in Earth Station 8 in just a few moments. And hometown America wasted no time in getting into the spirit of things. A new president, freedom for the hostages. Right in our own backyard, suburban independence burst with national pride. News Center 8's Gary Stromberg reports.
When the release of the hostages was first announced, Pete Wisniewski, the mayor of Independence, rushed out of City Hall to sound the Liberty Bell, the bell of freedom. Independence owns an exact replica of America's treasured Liberty Bell. It is sounded on special occasions, and today was definitely special. In honor of the former hostages, the mayor decided to parade the bell through the streets of Independence. When the people heard it, they stopped, realized our nation's hostage nightmare had finally come to an end, and they felt a wave of patriotism. The students at Independence High School heard the bell and felt a sense of relief. They knew a burden had been lifted from our shoulders. The youngsters at the elementary school heard the bell, waved to the mayor, and smiled, but didn't fully understand what this was all about. When the bell arrived back at City Hall, the yellow ribbon was finally removed. The ordeal had ended. Our people are coming back. The ringing of the Liberty Bell here was a simple gesture, but a gesture that summed up the emotions of all of us. It was indeed a fitting welcome, a welcome to independence. Gary Stromberg, News Center 8, Independence.
The families of the 52 hostages, including those in the Cleveland area, expressed relief and joy at the release of the captive Americans. Joseph Mia...
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of
President of the United States,
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend
the
Constitution of the United States. So help you God.
So help me God.
Good evening. 41 minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as this country's 40th president, the American hostages in Iran began their flight to freedom. They left aboard 2 Algerian jetliners from Tehran's Mehrabad airport, blacked out because of war, their way lit only by the moon and Iranian television lights. Iran released photographs of 2 of the hostages, Army Staff Sergeant Joseph Subich, Jr. of Redford Township, Michigan, and Embassy Vice Consul Donald Cook of Ellicott City, Maryland. All of the Americans were led single file through a 15-yard gauntlet of 50 or so Iranian youths organized for the purpose, shouting a parting death to America. Iranian television filmed the departure and later broadcast a 3-hour propaganda program. It was a little more than an hour after the Americans took off from Tehran that they literally put Iran behind them, crossing into Turkish airspace. Their first stop on their long route home was Athens, where during a 90-minute layover for refueling of their planes, they were greeted by U.S. Ambassador Robert McCloskey. From Athens, they headed for Algiers, where 2 U.S. Air Force medevac planes were waiting to take them to Frankfurt, West Germany, and then to the Air Force Hospital in nearby Wiesbaden, arrival there expected tomorrow morning. It was a long and harrowing ordeal for the hostages, their families, and indeed the entire nation. And it was an ordeal that plagued the presidency of Jimmy Carter, an ordeal whose final resolution eluded his presidency by less than an hour. More on this story from Robert Pierpoint at the State Department.
President Carter worked in the Oval Office throughout the night and before dawn this morning signed the executive orders that triggered the hostages' release. His signature removed one final obstacle discovered by Iran yesterday, which might have prevented the Iranians from receiving money that rightfully belonged to them long after the hostages were home. Once this problem was resolved, the president ordered the flow to begin of nearly $8 billion in Iran's frozen assets to the Bank of England.